We should be live. And good morning to everybody, and welcome to Behind the Markets to our Facebook audience, and good morning to those who are listening on radio. I hope you're having a good day and you had a good Africa Freedom Day. It was actually quite jam packed yesterday. From Dumisani's landing after his 600-kilometer walk for entrepreneurship, which was underattended, I would rather say, because we should be seeing more people there. I mean, it was a lot of people, but we should be seeing more. I mean, if we're talking about business is the main thing, then that should be the stuff we went to. Mdara's League football, as I call it yesterday, the Zambia Legends versus Barcelona Legends, where Zambia pulled off a surprise victory against an aging Barcelona team. I think they put Patrick Kluivert on the field at one point. If I'm correct, Lucky, please fact check us. When did that man retire? That was a long time ago. Yes, and but then how was your Africa Freedom Day?
That was great. It was just a bit tiring, stress, of course, of the same, momentous day it was. People trying to make way to the Hero Stadium, and so it's all fracas because I was at some point I was in that area and just trying to get away from that. Ish, it was a good one, but at the end of the day, watched the game in a relaxing environment. I think it was very good. Very uplifting spirit in the country.
You who are not married men, when someone says relaxing environment, that's what they mean. Anyway, so let's get down to. I'm not going to sell you down the river any further, Vernon. I'm not going to sell you down the river any further. Let's get down into today's conversation. So we're going to continue from yesterday. And we're going to go through our discussion from yesterday again. Please give us a shout out where you're joining us from. What's your name? And give us any of your biggest takeaways from today's conversation. Because we are going to be discussing things to do with African freedom and how we should be approaching it. So I'm going to be sticking to the Dubois versus Washington battle, W.E.B. Dubois. Versus Washington battle of how we should be doing things. The talented 10th versus the self-help principle. These are feuding views and ideologies as to how we should be developing post-colonization. Should we be looking for representatives and leaders, or should we be doing it on our own? Vernon, I don't know if you can catch me. Okay, I think we've just lost him for a second, but he'll be back. Should we be doing it on our own? So I just want to start by first offloading some things, I think, from yesterday. There is one piece of market data deep dive that did come out, trade data, which has come out from yesterday. So all of you who are looking for the Zambia March, sorry, I think we just lost that one. The Zambia May trade report. Sorry, we just have that one a bit wrong there. This is the April trade report, not the March one. We'll correct that later. But we did see that net trade again was at a deficit, the second consecutive deficit, and the third in the last 5 months. So we are seeing a contraction in the net trade position, $135 million deficit, but at least this one was a bit smaller. It was $25 million deficit. Remember, we do trade data in dollars. What was the key drivers we saw there? Sorry, this is 76% lower than where we saw it last year. Key drivers we saw to the shrinking deficit was the lower export decline. We saw export declines come down to 13%, while import growth dropped as well by 20% due to consumer import growth changes. So I think you want to just pay attention to what we saw there. But we saw 20% growth in imports month on month versus 13% decline in export. That's smaller than the 21% previous month, and the import growth is smaller than the 35% previous month. That ended up squeezing the trade deficit from yesterday. So we also did see that export declines across agriculture and mining triggered a smaller but second consecutive deficit. You did see, if you look up there, agriculture, I think that to me was the shocker, is down to 46 million. That is the lowest monthly agricultural exports since January 2022. So there has been a contraction. Obviously, we are trying to stop smuggling and all sorts of things, but even mainstream agricultural produce has actually dropped in that period. Non-traditional exports Non-traditional exports also in general were down 15%, but the non-agricultural non-traditional exports were up 26% year on year in terms of $231 million. So they're still running. So the non-traditional things like sulfur, nickel, those things, they're still moving. Copper exports down 22% from last year to $542 million. We only saw $819 million worth of export, down 12% from where we were last year and down 0.7%. So another decline in export month on month. We saw imports imports up 20% from where they were, but they shrank by 12%. The key driver to the shrinking of imports we did see that came down was consumer imports were dropped by 15%. So consumer goods imports came down by 15% to 240. And we also saw raw materials, in other words, the imports that we use, they were down by 42%. So those are the key drivers that help shrink inflation, import growth, and also export growth. So now let's keep an eye on that. If we're looking at April 2022 in terms of year-to-date trade, we're seeing that that's much weaker than it's a $309 million in terms of net trade. That's 75% weaker than where we were last year at this time. So you can see that our trade surplus is really shrunk. And that's mainly due, if you look, 20% decline in exports, while you're seeing a 52% bump up in consumer goods imports. We have imported, Vernon, $1 billion worth of finished products that come into Zambia. And we have intermediary only 1.2 billion, that's up 0.2%. And we've imported 70% more raw materials, but that's due to the price. Okay, that is $346 million worth of raw materials have come in, but the real one has been consumer goods imports. This is what's creating a lot of weakness in our currency. End products coming in worth $1.075 billion. So that should tell you that's where the Zambian consumer is recovering, but unfortunately, that means that there's a lot of import going on. Simultaneously, we've seen copper output has continued to sag. It's 15% lower than where it was last year for this month and 7% lower than the previous month. Year to date, we've seen that copper output is down 16.8% from where we were last year. That's also some tough news that we're starting to swallow here. In terms of copper output, you can see it went up a little bit from last month. It went up a little bit from last month. I think we had the wrong figure there, but it was up a little bit from last month, 62.3 million. That's what we're seeing in terms of last month's growth, 62,300. My goodness, that's a Jacob Zuma moment. It went up from last month, but unfortunately, it's continued to sag as well. If you're looking at it in terms of April data, year-to-date monthly copper output down 15% from where it was last year, but year-to-date down 17% from where it was last year. So we're continuing this slide downwards. Simultaneously, we're also seeing that copper export is still, as I said, copper export sales are down to 535 million. So this is still very low. It's not the lowest it was. It's still higher than last month, but it is still very low. Copper export again is also down 22% from where it was last year. Now, if you take a look also now, due to poor agricultural non-traditional export, we have seen that we've continued to slow down in export growth. Okay, so if you take a look, we're continuing to slow down in export growth in non-traditional because of agricultural export. And you can see agricultural export has slowed down to the lowest it's been since January 2022, $45.97 million worth of agricultural export. That is the lowest that we've seen since January 2022. Down, obviously, up 16% from where it was, up 16% year to date, but down 20%, up 16% from where we were year to date last year, but down 20% from this same month last year. Now, if you look at some agricultural exports that we've extracted in dollars, this is where they were. So if you look at oil cake, that's down from $10.7 million down to $7.4 million worth of export. Raw sugarcane is down from $8 million to $5 million. That's not good for companies like Zambia Sugar. Obviously, sugar prices have gone up. Buttermilk up from up to 4.2 million from 2.5. Coffee up 2.4 from 1 million. Animal feed around 1.3 stayed the same. Other corn seeds, live fowls, and bran and shan. So you can see that the main ones have come down, being oil cake and raw sugar. They came down as of last month. If you're looking at non-traditional, non-agricultural export, on the other hand, sulfur went up from $25 million to $39.7 million. This is an export that we don't pay attention to enough. Electricity, Vernon, we exported $32 million worth of electricity, up from 30.9. Dumpers up from 11 to 23. Silicon manganese stayed the same. Non-alcoholic beverages stayed the same. Nickel actually dropped in exports. Sulfuric acid went up slightly. Cement only went up from went to 6.4 million from 5.3 million. Cement clinkers went up from 3.6 to 4 million. Wires of refined copper went down, and the electric conductors went down, while quicklime went down drastically from 8.1 million to 3.2 million. So the key driver has been sulfur, electricity, and dumpers. That's actually what led to export growth in the non-traditional sector. So that, Vernon, is our trade outlook and our trade information, which has showing that trade is going to continue slowing down because the consumer is getting a little bit stronger, though that is slowing down a little bit, but that is going to be affecting our FX rate going forward. Now, I did get asked a question recently, Vernon, why I keep talking about wealth insurance. I keep talking to people about investing in assets that oppose the market as an insurance policy, and I always mention gold or cryptocurrency. Here's an analyst here's a gentleman who was actually talking about it from a perspective about why gold is something that you put in a portfolio. How do you access it? Look for things like there are online options. Please sit down with an advisor to take you through it step by step. Make sure you get the right platform, the right wallet, but there are options that people can access gold even here from Zambia. KYCs are a little bit difficult, though I've often said that what we should be doing in Zambia is holding gold at the central bank and giving people gold certificates that they can save in so that we can have an alternative to the dollar in this country, so that we can have a gold savings culture as well. That's something we should do while also promoting gold mining. It will promote gold mining if gold savers can then demand it, and then we can get some gold refining. That will actually pull the supply chain. But here's one of the main cases for people to invest in gold, and this is what the case that was made. Now, remember, I'm not saying hold your whole portfolio, because I know our people, Vernon. The moment you say something, they'll go and just liquidate everything they have, go and grab it, and then say, I'm going to be rich tomorrow. No. That is not what I'm saying. Okay, listen very carefully. You keep a small component, because he's going to tell you why gold is an insurance policy. So listen to this very carefully.
Gold, and I don't really see it as an investment. I just see it as insurance. So regardless of the price, I always put it 10% of my portfolio, because I don't care if the price goes up or down. It's just purchasing power. It's that insurance policy. Now, if you say the next 5 months, I would say my base case is that gold actually goes down, believe it or not, because I think that's overbought. And if you look at history, going back to COVID or the GFC, when you have a crisis situation, gold actually goes down, because it's the only thing on the balance sheet that these big funds can sell. It's the only thing that has a bid, because it's doing its job, right? So if you go back to Lehman Brothers, you see that gold just crashes. And then once rates get down to zero and the market says, okay, we've kicked the can down the road, as Pat was saying, because we did all this, we'll call it quote unquote money printing, then gold rips higher, absolutely rips higher. And it did the exact same thing during COVID. So if you say the next 5 months, I'd say there's my base case is that gold actually trades lower. But if you say over the next 3 years or the next 5 years, I think it goes way higher. But I don't know in real terms, definitely in nominal terms. But again, that's with the caveat of I think anyone should always own gold pretty much at any price, because it's not an investment, it's insurance.
Okay, so I say that again, Vernon. Now, does that explain why I talk about gold and cryptocurrency and those things? That it's not an investment, it's an insurance on your wealth, because you're saying, look, what's the probability the whole financial system can crash? Okay, so in the short run it goes with it, but in the long run it says, right, time to go the opposite direction. So I'll give you a perfect example that happened here in Zambia, if to gold holders. I had mine through back when Binance gave people access, easy access to own assets there. I had mine. That's when I was holding PAX G tokens, which represent gold. Okay, so they're pegged to gold prices. So what happens is that when the stock market crashed, basically during 2020, and the bond market also in secondary terms also started to see a crash, not in primary terms, but in secondary terms. And I say it again, not in primary, but in secondary. In other words, not the people who are holding bonds, but the people who are trading their bonds. They also saw secondary market prices start to come down. It was the gold and the Bitcoin portfolio that went up, okay, during that period. So what that did, they went up so drastically that by the time the stock market and the bond market was recovering, the gold and the Bitcoin market were coming down. So what we saw was steady growth. Okay, that's what we had in the portfolio. We just saw steady growth. We didn't have, zinging around. We just had steady movement of assets. So that is what gold does. It gives you an insurance policy against high velocities in the medium term of your wealth. So that is what you should look at it for, just specifically in that case. Okay, not for anything else, just specifically as if there is a broad market downturn, or let's say the whole financial system melts down and we're now at a situation, then gold becomes something to hold on to. Everybody needs to understand, Vernon, that money is a network. That's all it is. Okay, money is just a network that we kind of communicate transactions in. It is an agreed upon network, and it's a big enough network that we all are happy with it, but it is a network. I want to read something to you from our friend here who actually came back from his walk. What's it called? This radical entrepreneur guy, and he actually talked about his journey once in terms of selling goats, and he tells a story about how, I think it's in chapter 4, where he talks about persistence. And he talks about being persistent, or sorry, starting underdog businesses and the need to work hard. But I want to pick up on one thing where he talked about how he actually used to buy goats to trade them. And this is, I think, on page 31. He says, I learned the trade of hard work quite early, somewhere around 2005, when I was 15 years old. After running my kiosk business, I ventured into trading goats. My business model was to go deeper into the villages to buy goats and resell them in Lusaka. Farmers were more comfortable giving their livestock using a barter system basis than for cash. So I decided to start taking commodities to them. The hottest cake to exchange were bicycles. I would buy a bicycle called an Eagle, which was a respected brand in Zambia, especially amongst farmers in the village. Ride it 40 kilometers to my parents' farm. Then the following morning, ride it a further 35 kilometers as early as 4 a.m. to ride the same bicycle 35 kilometers west past Nampundwe mines to Shibiunju district. I would then cycle an average of 75 kilometers over 2 days and exchange it for 5 goats by 10 a.m. So you can see, at the end of the day, the reason I read that story is because even here in Zambia, there's a specific group of people who don't want to use cash. They prefer the actual things themselves. Because, Vernon, let me ask you a question. What use is a pile of 10 grand, okay, 10,000 kwacha, when there's no shop open? No shop in sight. Imagine you were dropped in the middle of nowhere. There are those nowhere places in Zambia. Those areas we only hear about during elections. Those areas. So imagine you were dropped there with a full stack. Here's 10,000 kwacha, Vernon. But there's not a shop in sight. There's not a store. There's nothing. You're just in the middle of the woods. What would that be to you? How valuable is that money to you now? Your microphone's off. Your microphone.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah. I just need to get the mic closer again.
Right. It's just about pointless to have money if you have nowhere to purchase goods. So you'd rather, as you're trading, you are given, whatever item, in exchange of that whatever item value that you'll be giving away.
So yeah, so that's the point I think I was trying to drive is that's why people talk about things like gold. Let's say this network of money actually breaks down. Okay, the same way the internet can break down, the same way anything can break down. Electricity is a network, internet is a network, and network can fail. Okay, so let's say the network fails. What's the backup? That's why you own that system, because then the value of your money can then be transferred into the value of the gold that you're holding, because you don't know what the next commodity is that everyone needs at that given time. So he had to recognize what that was. But it's just an example of how here in Zambia, by the way, that story was of 2005. It wasn't back in Chakuti Chakuti 1800. This was 2005 with a guy who's just in his 30s, still alive, explaining to you that there are parts of this country where barter trade still goes on, where people would say, look, you can give me 100 kwacha, but where am I going to use this? There's nowhere. I'll start. What am I going to eat this? Bring the food itself, then we'll swap. That's what some of the areas. So they don't live in the reality where there's a Kantemba every corner for you. There are some areas in this country where the closest Kantemba is far, far away. So that's just something to think about, and something that I just wanted to grab onto when it comes to this case about keeping alternative assets that should there ever be a breakdown. So whenever people feel jittery about the market and emotions start to set in, those are what we call the emotional assets. Now, how much of your portfolio, you heard the gentleman say, I don't keep more than 10%. Really, Ray Dalio even says people 15% of your portfolio at most should be kept in either gold or just these experimental things. Gold, half of it, and then the other half, commodities, anything that can, whenever people feel jittery, they'll rush into it. You can keep it in paintings, all sorts of things. That's if you're wealthy enough. But cryptocurrency, gold, animals, whatever you want, keep it in there, because whenever the price of things starts to go up, you'll see like your animal assets maybe start to go up. So if inflation really kicks in, maybe the goats that you're holding, the price of those things go up. But you know that there's a cost to holding those things, by the way. Don't try and become goat rich next week. There's a cost to holding those things. So try and also keep assets that don't cost anything to hold. This is where people, can I tell you, this is where a lot of people make mistakes. Whenever they're thinking about these other things that they have to hold, there's actually a cost to holding cattle, goats, chickens. There's a risk and there's a cost. Your chickens can die at any time. Okay, your goats can run off, get stolen. You have to keep them. You have to keep an eye on them, because those things just wander off into the fields. Okay, your cows must be protected. They must be fed. There's actual work you need to put into keeping cows, people. You don't just wake up in the morning with a stick and a straw in your mouth and say, I've got cows. There's actual things you have to do to manage cows. Okay, so this is why I keep telling people that if you're gonna hold wealth, hold assets that don't require storage costs or management costs, because management costs can really be high. Now the problem is there's a lot of hidden management costs in a lot of these other ones as well. So that's really where I wanted to go with that conversation, Vernon. Before we peel off into the main talk today, or the main topic of discussion, which is the main topic of discussion, which is the development of a free Africa. But we do have one question here from Fred Malanji Swambo, who said, "Good morning, guys. Just one quick question. Just one quick one. Wanted to find out if I can use my stockbroker to purchase gold. No, not in Zambia. You can't use the local stockbrokers unless maybe you're not in Zambia. There are some stockbrokers outside who can allow investment brokerage accounts that do allow for it, but not here in Zambia. You don't find that you're able to do that. A lot of these are online options. I really wish we allowed our gold market to connect with our local savers, so that we could have that local market here and also keep that reserve currency. But unfortunately, it's like the foresight of our people is just not great enough to actually recognize that could be a legitimate market. You have pension savings accounts, which really could benefit from the gold side of the market. You have the pension fund industry is currently sitting somewhere close to about 14 billion. They could benefit from being able to pump some money into that. You're also seeing some benefits in terms of the institutional savings. Maybe if you gave banks a little bit of access to keep some of their reserves like that. Banks have got a huge asset basis. You've also seen even here for even for us who are individuals who are looking for where we can save, there is a significant amount of people who could go into that market and keep 10% of their wealth, even 5% of their wealth just there, just so that in case anything, that's the kind of thing that can level and balance off instead of exposing them only to the cryptocurrency market, which is highly volatile. Really, that is a policy that we have constantly talked about. But there are some steps. At least we're talking about gold exchanges being formed. That is the first step. So now if we can start to now mold those things where we're trying to get a local gold market connected to a gold exchange and then have gold auctions, the same way we have bond auctions, treasury bill auctions, and monthly gold auctions, we can then do that. Then what remains is what can get exported out of the country to so forth, wherever they want to take it. Because really the large majority of the gold that's taken in Zambia gets mined and it goes to South Africa and off to never be seen again. We never really see it ever again. Off it goes. So that we really would like to see if we can store as much of our gold as possible, because the problem, Vernon, is what happens if, and this, let's get away from conspiracy for a second. Everything has a probability of happening, even if it's 2%. Okay, but what happens if the US dollar does collapse? It's not the first global currency ever to collapse, by the way. There have been global currencies and superpower currencies that have collapsed due to excess printing and various activities. So let's not pretend this can't happen. But we're not saying it's going to happen next week. I know people get jittery. They start typing, start thinking, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. We're already, no. Okay, let's all calm down. What I'm trying to say is that it can occur. There's a probability it can. So it's a good idea to have some gold as an insurance policy as a country. So therefore, if we encouraged our people to save in it, our pension funds to save in it, NAPSA to hold some of it, everybody just to hold a little bit of it, therefore we can store some of it in our country. And if the dollar-based monetary system collapses, well, que sara, we've got gold, the value will go up, because if the dollar vanishes, the gold price goes up, then our reserves are protected. Okay, so you always keep it as just some form of insurance policy against a collapse of a dollar, especially with the rise of regionalism, and there'll be no more of a giant global network any longer. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Vernon.
No, not really. We can move on.
Okay, so let's get into our main conversation point today as we're talking about trying to get into our people's development. So yesterday I introduced the conversation about Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, but I want to just quickly go through some statements that were made by Booker T. Washington regarding the development of our people. And he really did strike this chord about voting, and he talked about the citizen, because and I'm going to read this statement. This comes from his book, The Future of the American Negro, and he writes this statement: "In my mind, there is no doubt that we made a mistake at the beginning of our freedom of putting the emphasis on the wrong end. Politics and holding office were too largely emphasized, almost to the exclusion of every other interest. Henceforth, the Negro will throw aside non-essential and cling to the essential: property, economy, education, and Christian character. The individual or race that owns property, pays taxes, possesses intelligence and substantial character is the one which is going to exercise the greatest control in government." Okay? So you see what he's trying to say here. By having economic activity in your society, you will have greatest control. Now, he didn't say the greatest presence. He said control. There's a difference, okay? You can have your people in government, but what they do is dependent on who controls them, who pays their taxes, who writes their policies, who owns the assets that they utilize, or the assets that create economic activity in your country, who owns the businesses, who owns everything. So this is the baseline of trying to make proper developmental steps as a group of people. Now, Booker T. Washington went further to actually cite this, and he just summarized it very quickly in this next point, where he talked about citizenship. He says, "I have always advised to my race to give attention to acquiring property, intelligence as character as the necessary basis for good citizenship rather than mere political agitation. Okay? So he's trying to tell people this thing of jumping into everything is political, the president, the this, the that. This is the mentality we harbor as Zambians. Everything is politics, 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 politics. We're always running after trying to get things. But what we don't understand is no matter who you put in government, it's the people who are going to pay taxes to that government, the companies. Now, remember one sad statistic, Vernon. Only 0.3% of taxpayers, okay, 1,600 tax accounts make up 80% of the taxes collected by this country. What do you think that does? Those 0.3% have got such massive power, okay, massive amounts of power. What do you think that ends up doing, Vernon, to the system? Okay, your political system, you can put anyone there, but those people are dependent on those 1,600 institutions and taxpayers to be able to get their budgets running. So those 1,600 institutions and taxpayers have got power. They've got actual legitimate power over your politicians, no matter who you put in there. Okay? No matter who. Because if those companies don't pay taxes, the government budget goes under. And that government is going to be in trouble. No matter how socialist they are, no matter how powerful they want to be, they will always have issues. They have tried to say, okay, fine, we'll take the mine. And then what happens? They can't run it because they don't have anywhere to sell the copper. Okay? At the end of the day, they don't have the customer base. They don't have the transportation networks. They don't have the value chain knowledge. They don't have the value chain relationships to be able to operate that thing. Having the knowledge to operate a copper mine is different than having the relationships to do it. Because in order to operate something, more important than knowledge is actually relationships. Okay? If you don't have connections and relationships, you can't operate something. So the reality is these institutions have got power. So what Booker T. Washington is trying to say is, as a society, develop legitimate power first before you go into agitating for politics and demanding for so many things. So he's actually trying to drive that out. Now, let me give you the statistics on why I've always worried about why we have to be very careful. Now, I'm not saying we should become undemocratic, but I'm just saying you have to be very careful about just standardly applying democracy into Africa. And the reason I say this is because we evidently don't understand the system at work. Okay, the system at work, and this is if we measure. So let me just pull this one out. If we measure the outlook here, so here's the. I broke it down to what Booker T. Washington actually said. He said people who need property, ownership, intelligence, and character. Now we couldn't measure character, but I've kind of got the other ones there. So if you look there, Vernon, if you look at high school graduation rates between the US, EU, UK, Switzerland, Zambia. Okay, 88% for the US, 85% for EU, 91% for the UK, 86% for Switzerland, 29% for Zambia. 29% of Zambian adults have finished grade 12. What does that? You see where I'm going at with this. So already, number one, education disqualified. Number two, formal employment, so economic activity. 62% of US adults aged 25 are formally employed adults. 62%. 55% of the EU, 62% of the UK, 68% of Switzerland, 17% of Zambians. No tax-paying jobs, disqualified, already there. Formal employers, people who are employers. I think this number has finally improved, but this is where it was before the election. 1.5% of American adults, 2.8% of the EU, 1.6% of the UK, 4.4% of Switzerland, 1.3% of Zambian adults. We were disqualified. Right there, we were just disqualified. Okay, I think that number at least is improved. Formal home ownership. Sorry, this 1.5% number is incorrect for America. It's 62%. Just an error there. 62% for America, 71% for the EU, 63% for UK, 44% for Switzerland, 14% for Zambia. Disqualified once more. Okay, so in other words, when property taxes are being discussed, Zambians, with most of us, you don't even pay property taxes, no land rates, nothing. Kwazila, you've got nothing there to talk about. So already you're not involved in that conversation. Mean household wealth, $79,000 for the American, $35,000 for the EU, $146,000 for the UK, $120,000 for Switzerland, and $2,000 for Zambians. Kwasida, nothing again. You see, the average Zambian, no wealth to speak of. Okay, no wealth to speak of for the average Zambian. So already, if you don't improve these metrics, your voters will vote with their stomachs and not with their brains. Okay. And as a result, strong citizenship becomes an issue, and politicians can always manipulate the voter. So we'll take a break for now, and then we're going to discuss the two developmental models. I've given you the backdrop, but we'll discuss the two developmental models as we look on the other side of things. And we'll get your views as well, Vernon, on that. And we are back, and thank you very much, Vernon, for bringing us back. So, Vernon, we left with a thought, on that data that we had shared about assessing home ownership levels, business ownership levels, median household wealth, education, employment. Because these are the things that whenever the government is saying we are going to give out free this, we're going to give out, you're like, yay, whose taxes are you going to get that from? Where? Because Booker T. Washington was addressing the white Americans, and he was saying, listen, it's in your best interest for us blacks to get rich, and to get rich by getting educated, having business and that stuff. Because when we own stuff, we get concerned about the government raising taxes. We get concerned about big budgets. We get concerned about those things because we're economically active. We don't want the government. If I own property, I don't want the government raising property taxes because they're making promises to the poor. I don't want that. I want them to make sure that it's okay. Okay, I don't want this redistribution of wealth happening through the government all the time. So the wealthier your population gets, the less government they want. Okay, that is the reality that you're trying to look for. So the point is to actually develop if you want to develop a good democracy, and this is what I've said, is that what holds the Western liberal democracies together is that their populations are actually quite affluent. The affluence of their populations has actually helped them so that the average person actually debates and says, yo, why are you raising taxes? What's that about? Because I own a property. Why are you coming after me? I have a job. Why are you coming after me? So there's always this battle now where there is resistance to expansion of government too quickly. So that's why, yes, their governments just tend to borrow a lot more and not raise taxes. In Zambia, they just raise fees on you. Okay, anything just goes up. We're raising this tax, raising that tax. They just raise things when they want. They just triple prices of things, fire this, that. It just goes up. Why? Because the majority of the population are not economically active. So if you want to develop a good, robust democracy, the thing you have to do is Booker T. Washington gives you those 4 pillars: on enterprising people who own equity, who have education. So enterprising, educated equity holders are exactly what you're looking for, or employed / enterprising equity holding employed. So that's really what you're looking for. Sorry, educated people. That's really what you're looking for in order to hold it. So what are your thoughts, Vernon, before we get into the 2 models against one another? Volume, Vernon. Yeah, add your microphone. It's got you again.
You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So I was saying that it all just still boils down to education in the country. Now you cannot have too many not learned people and you expect them to be handling finances, prudently and in a matured way. So of course, what you should be expecting, even those, of course, not now getting a job is what of course is considered to be financial freedom. When initially, even when you are still employed, you could just be not actually financially free. So it all boils down to now educating our population in our country with more knowledge and more sensitization really about wealth, because we have grown up to know that this is the way of life when it comes to money, and this is the one way to find money, and this is why you can't blame parents for always trying to take their children to school so they can go to college and get themselves a white collar job, because that is the way they think their children are going to be able to sustain themselves, and of course later on there goes the Bafana Nikakupa father type of arrangement. I looked after you, so you also look after me. But you see, education will still, I cannot overemphasize education. Different forms, different material, different faculty, education, you can never go wrong. With regards to, in Africa, how we're faring with regards to how we're managing monies, I remember, passing these sentiments confidently. I think at about a month or two ago, I said, Africa, we have a lot and we have enough to sustain ourselves. But then, because I personally feel we do not really know the know-how, how to, maximize what we have into the best possible resource in itself. This is why we feel exporting actually, you know, this is just something you shared about, the radical entrepreneur. They were able to trade because they saw the value in those items, and because they were able to see that, now in Africa, the trade and the history actually has been centered on us getting the little value out of something that is going to give the other person more value. Imagine, Mutwale, I'm going to give you 2 or 5 kilogram of what do you call it, what do you call it, copper, and then you're going to give me, I don't know, give me 100,000. In exchange, I'm going to spend the 100,000 with my no knowledge about finance. I'm going to squander that, money that you've given me. What you're going to do with that? How much produce you're going to
Oh
make
no no
from
no no
that?
no 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 no! I'm going to give that money back to you. In fact, the very person I've given you that 100,000, you're going to give that money back to me
You see that?
because you're going to spend it on things that I make. So at the end of the day, I
Out of
get both
something
the
that I
resource
consider from
and
life.
the money back.
You see. So I'm not sure if it's just an issue of money, but understanding the value also is very. This is why people nowadays, especially business people, they feel when they're dealing with whites, Indians, all these foreign guys, they feel that's when they're really at peak. These guys I'm dealing with, top guys. Those guys understand your value better than you do yourself, and that's why they're here. All these people are flying all the way to Zambia because they know what is in Zambia, and seemingly we have no idea what we really have. And trust me, they will give you anything. What do you want? A car, a VX? What do you want? A nice house? What do you want? They will give you that because they know soon you're going to go broke and you sell the same property to them. But the access you'd have given them, first of all, the access you'd have given them to your own country, to your own resources. Secondly, they are going to, whatever they'll make from whatever you've allowed them to, you're going to be buying from them. So initially, it will not really and them still give it them, the money. At the end, they make profits and walk away. So understanding what we have as a country, understanding what we have as a nation, as Africa at the end of the day. And I think this just boils down to education, understanding the value and what you can make from what you have, from the resources you have. I think that is going to do us a lot of good as Africa and stop depending on other people to make life better for us. Imagine you have a produce like copper, and then it is transported elsewhere. Someone makes very interesting produce from that, bring this back in the country, and we start buying us. We're even making noise about it. We are ashamed of ourselves. But by now we should have discovered many and multiple ways to actually, maximize from this natural resource we have. But imagine we are happy to sell this to other people so we can have little value out of it. And at the end of the day, we start buying the same. It's because,
So
misuse of resources. Mutwale, you are in Kapiwe, you bring up maize, you bring it to Lusaka for production and processing, then we take it all the way back to your place for selling. That's what we're doing. We mine copper, take it out of the country, sell it. It's back in a different form and different produce, and then we start buying ourselves. I think there's got to be a lot of
just
education
just
with
just
regards to
quickly
that.
to keep it on the track here, because my chief concern, Vernon, is more than just the trade. My concern is that a citizen will not make a good political decision, okay, in general, just the political decision, who to pick, if they do not own property, have an education, or have employment or an enterprise. If you do not have equity, education, slash enterprise, whether it's in the form of employment, whether it's in the form of a business, if you do not have these three things, or let me just say economic activity, employment, so economic activity, education, and some form of equity, if our citizens are failing to tick these three boxes, they will judge the politicians not by the policies they present, but by the promises they make. That is where the problem comes for me. And that is why the most important avenues we should be working on is improving the wealth. We shouldn't be talking about poverty alleviation. We should be talking about wealth creation. Okay, that is what we should be. That's why we're having these conversations all the time. It's about stimulating wealth creation, it's about stimulating economic enterprise, economic activity, because the more things people own, the more things people know, the more things people do, the less they depend on government. Okay, So it's about the things that people do know or own. And if they can tick those three boxes, then our citizens are in a much stronger position. So this is why we have to be very careful about using politics to develop people. And that is why I gave you yesterday's view on the two views of Booker T. Washington. Dubois versus Booker T. Washington, where Dubois talked about the talented 10th, and he said the leaders amongst the black people will be the result of the development of black people, while Booker T. Washington says the self-help, the character building, the hard work, the entrepreneurial skills, the relevant skills. Okay, people learning. He gave an example about playing the piano versus learning how to make bricks. Okay, and he says, to our society, he said, it's wonderful to learn how to play the piano. That's such a nice and lovely skill. But he said, it's not relevant to our society. Okay. Because, and he was talking about black American slaves then. He said, it's not relevant to our society because playing the piano is of no use. It's like me trying to teach people how to trade, I don't know, derivatives. I'm gonna pick that out there. Right now, nobody has access to that stuff. It's not even a known thing. It's not even a thing people can use. Just a nice sounding thing. Okay, but can it be something that people can use? That is where the problems start to come. So he was trying to talk about people talking about things like playing the piano, and he says, in as much as it's wonderful to see at these schools nice classical pianos, the problem is that if we don't equip people with the skills that are needed in society, what ends up happening is they stop being useful to society. So that's what I was trying to drive at a point here, that the relevance of skills that we're putting in terms of the hands of the people, that's one problem. But two, the other factor I think that we need to start looking at is not just the relevance of skills, what do they own, so that when a politician says we're going to give out free unga to every house for 2 years straight, you're going to think, wait, how? Okay, and with whose money are you going to do that with? Okay, because I'm the one who pays taxes. When you're a taxpayer, when you see money getting deducted either from your business contracts or whatever it is, when you start seeing money getting taken away from you, you start to see the government a little bit differently. But if you see the government as your blesser, you feel when you vote for them. That's my issue, because we cannot make government decisions as people if we are constantly not working on those three things. So, in as much as, so here's the solution I was saying, is that Booker T. Washington never ran for office. He never believed in political activism all the way through. He did support certain causes and everything, but he thought, as an educator, as a business person, as an individual in society, what can I do to improve this? This is why we're here on Money FM talking about money, trying to help Zambians start making better financial decisions, so that the more wealthy Zambians we can get, the more millionaires we can build in this country, the less people depend on government, the more power the citizens have, and the more of the ability they can to actually make their own economic way. Therefore, the government cannot get away with just promises. They're now judged on policies. So a functioning democracy requires that government be judged on policies and not promises. Okay, they must be judged on policies. And in order for you to get a citizenry that will judge your government on policies, they must own things, they must finish school, and they must be economically active. Because if they are those three things, their brain switches to say, let's read you on your policies. But if you have no economic activity, you've got no assets to your name, and you have no education underneath you, whether it's practical education or school education, if you got neither one of those three, you will listen to fairy tale policies. Fairy tale promises. That is what you will vote based on, and your democratic system will never work properly. Okay? So, what should we be doing in order to build Africa better and to build Zambia better? Is to build the human capital, the average Zambian. These are the markers we should be using for success of whether things are working in this country. What is the median household wealth of the average? What is the median household wealth of Zambians? What is the formalized employment rate or entrepreneurship rate? What is the median household income in terms of formal income that is being earned? Okay, these are the questions we should add. What is the high school completion rate? If we can get these four things right, the rest of it works itself out. Okay, but just focus intensely as a country on getting those 4 things right. And I'm going to leave it there.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.